Welcome back for another episode of Disturbing and Controversial Subreddits. Today we'll be looking at S-OffenderSupport, which is exactly what it sounds like. Let's investigate. If you enjoy internet mysteries and generally disturbing content, feel free to subscribe and turn on notifications for more content like this. If you're interested in supporting the channel, you can become a Ko-fi member or a channel member to gain access to uncut videos and other perks, or you can leave me a tip by clicking the thanks under this video. Thanks to anyone who considers this. This video will contain discussions of topics that some might find triggering. Viewer discretion is advised. You can become a Ko-fi member or a channel member to watch an uncut version of this video, which features extra details that were unsuitable for this cut. The About section of the S-OffenderSupport subreddit reads, "A place where people charged or convicted of S offences and their families can come for support and answers to questions best answered by people who have first-hand knowledge of the challenges they face." Of course, most people's instant reactions, myself included, when hearing that a subreddit like this exists, is shock, anger and disgust. Why should SOs be given any support after they committed some of the worst crimes imaginable? The word support alone implies that they deserve some level of sympathy, empathy, understanding, that they should be helped in some way. I think I speak for most people with any capacity for compassion towards victims of such crimes when I say, quite frankly, I don't care for the well-being of SOs. I have no personal desire to ensure a decent quality of life for someone that destroyed another person's life. That said, I try to approach topics like this in a rational and objective way without letting my emotional response cloud my judgment too much, so I went into this as open-minded as possible. Having no preconceptions of what support entails in this subreddit, for all I knew, its sole purpose was to prevent SOs from reoffending, in which case the effects of it would be a net positive, even if the idea of such a community doesn't sit right with me. In an ideal world, there would be no SOs, but in the world we live in, there is, so the best thing we can do is to reduce the chances of an SO committing the crime again, and if a subreddit like this could help to do that, I can't be totally opposed to its existence. Some posts on there are related to the prevention of reoffending. Some are by SOs who have recently been released from prison, who claim to have seen the error of their ways and want to live a better life. Others are by SOs who committed crimes years ago and are offering advice on how to become a better person. Most of these individuals seem to acknowledge that there's nothing you can do to put it right. The consequences for the victims are so severe that nothing can undo it or make it better. You can only not do it again, and try to better society in general in other ways, whether that's by donating to charities that support victims, or trying to educate others and potentially prevent other similar crimes from occurring in the future. Now, I don't know if anyone can truly repent after essaying someone. It's without a doubt one of the worst things you can do, and I think there's a significant distinction between it and other violent crimes because of the motive. SA is always committed for gratification. When it comes to murder, there are a million possible motives: revenge, jealousy, financial gain, organised crime, coercion. None of these make murder justifiable, but there is a difference between person A who murdered someone for financial gain and person B who murdered simply because they enjoyed killing. If person A could easily obtain the money without murdering anyone with no other consequences, they probably wouldn't murder. And if they wouldn't gain financially from the murder, they probably wouldn't do it. Murder is a means to an end for that individual. They enjoy the results of the murder, not the murder itself. Person B would be someone like Jeffrey Dahmer or Ted Bundy. They weren't killing people to cash in on a life insurance policy or to get revenge because the victims wronged them in the past, or because they were in a gang and they'd be killed if they didn't kill someone else. The motive was gratification. It was the killing itself that gave them pleasure. That makes person B much more dangerous, much less likely to ever repent, and therefore much harder to rehabilitate. You could argue that person B could never be rehabilitated. For obvious reasons, I don't think we have the data to definitively confirm that, but if Ted Bundy wasn't sentenced to death and had ever been released from prison, I certainly wouldn't want to be alone in a room with him. In terms of motive, SOs are comparable to person B. People don't SA for financial gain, they SA for gratification, because they take enjoyment out of the act itself, not because they will gain anything after the victim has been SA'd. So just like with person B compared to person A, it's a lot harder to rehabilitate them. I don't know if they would feel genuine remorse for their actions, or if they would refrain from doing it again solely because they don't want to face the consequences again. So I have no idea if we can be sure that the SOs who are talking about turning their lives around really would never reoffend, but of course I'd much rather see posts promoting accountability and rehabilitation than anything else. All that said, I am not an SO myself. I can't say from personal experience that SOs can never change, and I really hope I'm wrong in my assumptions. Here are a couple of posts from SOs who seem to be remorseful of their actions. You can make your own mind up on them. The first is from someone who I assume was convicted on CP charges, judging by his reference to material. I will never be able to undo the harm that I caused indirectly by creating a demand for the material I was consuming, nor the harm I caused directly to my family by continuing to consume that material and not getting help, even when I knew I should get it. That said, for all that harm, I am truly and deeply sorry. While I know it does not absolve me of any wrongdoing, I believe in taking accountability for my actions and gladly accept the consequences therein. I will continue to work towards my goal of getting help for the issues that caused or influenced this behaviour, and strive to ensure I am never in that place again. Here's a post from someone telling people not to minimise their actions. I've been watching this forum for a bit and my heart goes out to everyone. I spent years on the registry, and in the early days I did a lot of minimising and straight out lying to myself and others about the nature of my crime. I was 22 when this started, and now I'm almost 40. I'm off the registry and I've had years to grow. I have 2 daughters, one of which is about to be a teenager. When I was younger, it was easy to say to myself, well, she consented, so it was not too bad. But now being a father, I realise just how inappropriate my actions were. Please don't try to minimise your actions through excuses or half-truths. I've seen countless, well, I was torrenting something and there was some CP mixed in. That's not how the legal system works, broken as it may be. I've seen countless claims of innocence and entrapment, but ultimately, individual choices were made. I don't say this to be cruel, I say this because if we don't face the choices we've made, good and bad, we cannot grow as people. When we minimise, we open doors to make the same mistakes again, just as the alcoholic who says, one more drink won't hurt. No one lacks redemption. I look towards the man I was at 22, who only thought about getting laid, and the man I am now, and I'm proud of my growth. I'm still not where I want to be as a person, but I'm getting there. A huge part of that growth was understanding the points that got me here, facing the hard truths of the man I was against the man I want to be. It's scary. Being vulnerable is scary. Facing the fact that our choices had consequences, not only for us, can be hard, but it can also be freeing. There are rules on the subreddit against encouraging illegal activity, making excuses, victim blaming, and minimising your crime. Many of the posts are not even overly specific when it comes to the user's story. Often they're asking for advice related to the law and restrictions regarding probation, where they can and can't travel to, and how laws in different states or countries differ to where they currently live. Despite the rules discouraging SOs from minimising their crimes, there are, unsurprisingly, many examples of them doing just that. It seems to be more prevalent among those who were convicted of crimes related to CP, with some failing to understand how they've caused any harm, even going as far as to call it a victimless crime in some cases. I never thought I'd have to make the point that looking at any kind of inappropriate content involving children is inherently wrong, but here we are. As with any kind of paraphilia, people don't consciously choose what they're into, but the second you act on it, whether that's looking at CP or harming a child in real life, that is a conscious choice and it's disgusting. Those that claim that looking at CP is a victimless crime seem to think that because they're not actually interacting with the child themselves, they've done nothing wrong, totally ignoring the fact that they're still creating a demand for such content and acting as if it's normal to be attracted to kids in the first place. Another problem with some of these SOs is the lack of accountability regarding how they came to be in possession of CP. It's not uncommon for them to claim they just stumbled across it, as if they unlocked the phone one day and all of a sudden it just automatically downloaded. I'm not saying that no one has ever accidentally seen anything like that. I've heard stories of content like that being shared on normal social media sites before it's swiftly removed, but I don't believe it's a common occurrence. Given some of the topics I've covered in past videos, it shouldn't surprise you to hear that I've come across some vile things online, from videos of people being tortured to animal abuse, but never once have I ever seen any CP. I'm not overly familiar with the law when it comes to this topic, but I also can't see someone actually being convicted for coming across CP if it was a total accident and they never actually searched for it. One relevant example of one of these SOs is a post from a couple of weeks ago that read, "What's it like in prison? 1 count of possession of CP. Literally found 1 pic. Looking at 27 to 33 months. What kind of federal prison will it be and what will it be like?" The emphasis on 1 count and literally found 1 pic feels like OP is minimising it anyway, but taking a look at their post history provides some interesting context. There are countless comments on posts on subreddits like legal teens, barely legal teens, very barely legal, and 1819. What's bizarre is that they've made various comments on conspiracy subreddits related to cover-ups for the elites who were connected to Jeffrey Epstein, and complaining that a transgender lawmaker who was charged with distributing CP would get away with it because she's a Democrat, as if they themselves haven't literally admitted to looking at CP. Anyway, considering these shamelessly frequent subreddits dedicated to not safe for work content featuring women that are as young as they can be without it being illegal, I'm not particularly surprised they sought out content with even younger girls, and I don't really believe they only happened to find 1 photo as they claim. Before anyone comes for me, I know content featuring 18-year-olds is legal, and I'm not saying you're automatically an SO or a paedophile if you have ever watched anything with an 18-year-old, but if you are someone who is many years older than 18, I think it's questionable if you specifically seek out 18-year-olds, or if you're hanging around on subreddits like barely legal teens. I can't believe that's even a somewhat controversial opinion, to be honest, but anyway. It's not uncommon to see people complaining about how unfairly they're treated after their crimes, that the punishment was too severe and their lives will never be the same again. The link that many of them fail to make is that's exactly how the victim felt, only they did nothing wrong. Some SA survivors never recover from what happened. Not only is the experience itself deeply traumatic, but the aftermath too. It's not uncommon for them to blame themselves or feel ashamed about it, which can prevent them from even reporting it in the first place, and if they do, a tiny percentage of reported cases lead to the perpetrator being charged or convicted, at which point they're often accused of lying about it or questioned on what they could have done to prevent it. For many survivors, the ramifications of the assault itself last a lifetime. And the SOs on this subreddit that are complaining about how it's unfair for them don't seem to realise that. The difference is, SOs are facing the consequences of their own actions. Their victims are also facing the consequences of the SO's actions. Here's a quote from a comment by the partner of an SO. "The consequences are often so far beyond what other crimes get that it seems so very absurd. Public registries for 10 years to life, zoning laws, GPS monitoring, not being allowed in public if a child exists there, travel restrictions, vigilante violence, being rejected from jobs that will take any other felon, putting a stamp on your freaking passport. It's unconstitutionally dehumanizing. While I absolutely stand by everything I said before that quote, I guess there might be a point to be made that if SOs feel like there is no chance of redemption, there's potentially less incentive for them to not reoffend. They're already going to be on the register, and their reputations are ruined regardless of whether they commit the crime once or multiple times. For an SO who sees nothing wrong with their actions, they could think that they might as well just do it again because the long-term consequences won't be any more severe. To be clear, that's not me saying that I don't think they should face all those consequences. That point is not coming from a place of sympathy for the SO, but rather considering what might result in less potential victims in the future. Regardless, I don't think there is a solution. The consequences for the SO are still not really comparable to the consequences the victim has to deal with, so I can't say I'd be in favour of reducing them. As well as users who are SOs themselves, many members of the community are partners of SOs, and a lot of them also minimise their partner's crimes and complain about having to deal with the consequences. There are a lot of different circumstances, so I can't make one statement that applies to everyone. Some were already with their partners when they committed crimes, others met them after. While generally speaking, I don't think anyone but the SO should suffer the consequences of their actions. If you choose to be with or stay with someone who has done something like that, what do you expect? It seems that a lot of these people haven't experienced SA themselves, so I'm guessing they're somehow able to detach from the emotional response to some extent and look past it. Perhaps it might be different for an SO who really has turned their life around, if that's possible, and the crime occurred decades ago, but most of the SO's partners are posting about current situations. Almost all of them are crimes that occurred within the last couple of years. It's not really my place to speak for anyone else, but personally there's no way I could look past something like that, especially if it was so recent. If there's any way SOs can be rehabilitated, I can't see the change happening within a year or two. And of course, I wouldn't condone any violence or harassment to anyone who is in a relationship with an SO, but you can't stand by someone that has done something that bad and not expect any backlash. The post you can see on screen now is by a woman whose husband was recently arrested for possession of CP. They'd been married for 15 years and got together nearly 5 years before that. They had separated after he had had an affair, then got back together. The woman he had cheated with had found the CP and reported him, and now he's facing 5 to 8 years in prison. OP is sticking by him. She says she loves him even though her family is pushing her to get a divorce and, quote, trying to make him out to be a monster instead of someone who made really bad decisions. Call me crazy, but it seems blatantly obvious to me that this man left his wife for another woman who found CP on his computer, so broke up with him and reported him. So he went crawling back to his wife without telling her what he'd done, knowing that when the police eventually came knocking, she'd probably be stupid enough to stay with him, because he'd likely destroyed her self-confidence when he cheated on her, and she was that relieved to have him back that she was a lot more likely to overlook what he'd done so they could stay together. The worst part is, they have a 10-year-old daughter. Apparently an investigation showed no evidence of abuse towards her, but how on earth could OP even take that risk? How could she even look at her husband again, knowing that he was searching for inappropriate content of children when they have a child together? As bad as it would be to find out your husband is an SO of any kind, with stories like this, there's also the revelation that they're a paedophile as well, and I really don't understand how you could get over that. I want to cover another story from a woman whose boyfriend is an SO. It's quite different to the last, and I have a bit of a different opinion on it. Here's the first post. For starters, I am a spouse of an RSO. I think he's a good man who did a terrible thing, and I love him very much and don't harbour resentment towards him, but at times it is very hard for me to carry his scarlet letter. I feel that I have to lie to people and downplay details about him to my closest friends and family to avoid outing him as an RSO. My family loves him, they think he takes good care of me, and he's very supportive and understanding that the situation we are in impacts me too. He also is very understanding in terms of our relationship dynamic, as I have severe PTSD from childhood abuse and SA as an adolescent. I am, however, left feeling incredibly lonely and ostracised because he is on probation. My co-worker invited me to a barbecue, but she has young children, and since I've been filled with dread because she insists he comes, but he can't unless I inform her of his status. I'm always lying for him, and I feel like a criminal all the time. It's very hard for me to feel normal and like my partner is actually my partner. I can't keep making excuses as to why he doesn't go anywhere with me or why I keep flaking on plans. When I see happy families, I'm filled with sadness because we won't ever have that. I love him, he's my best friend, and I couldn't imagine leaving him, but he is not able to provide me with a normal life. Anyway, I was wondering what's the best course of action, or if there are any groups or places I could attend online or in person that deals with the trauma and loneliness that comes with this situation. Thank you. That post was from March 2022. 7 months later, OP posted an update in which she said things were going really well. They moved into a condo after living in a studio apartment where she was having daily seizures, but it sounds like she's doing a lot better now. Her next post was a long one and was about her brother, quote, "So most of my posts have been about my fiancé, but I also have a brother who is an RSO. For context, he has autism spectrum disorder and at the time of his offence was diagnosed with drug-induced psychosis due to abuse of datura, salvia and gypsum weed habitually. When he was in his teens, he was found unresponsive due to a ruptured appendix after being essentially missing for months. They found his next of kin, my father, and after being released from the hospital, he came to live with us. At the time, he was deep in psychosis. Like, he thought he could turn on lights with fireballs. He'd spend hours shaping. He didn't recognise us as his siblings most of the time. At times, he didn't even know his own name. We had a babysitter at the time who was 16. Me, him, and my 2 younger siblings were outside playing with a skateboard when the babysitter suddenly went inside, called the police, and then came out and told me, 9 years old at the time, my brother forcefully assaulted her and she called the police. She was our babysitter as my dad knew her boyfriend. Obviously, I believe her and would never blame a victim, but what I do know is when police arrived, she refused a SANE exam, not indicative of lying, as having been through one, I know they are traumatic, and that there was honestly no point in the day where this could have occurred, as we had been outside all day, save for the 20 minutes she spent inside calling the police as it was a snow day. There was never a point they could have been inside alone together. All of this was caught on CCTV footage and our apartment cam, and because she never showed up to court and didn't press charges, and she was a minor, the state picked it up. Here's where things get tricky. I already noted that my brother had no idea who I was or that I was his sister. He was completely psychotic. When police arrived, they separated us and asked us if he had ever touched us. I said yes, as at one point I was in the kitchen and he slapped my bum and rubbed my bra. I didn't tell anyone because I knew it would get him into trouble, and again, he was so sick that I truly don't think he could even recognise I was underage and that his actions were inappropriate. When interviewed by CPS, the entire interview was probing. I initially did not say anything until the investigator told me if I ever wanted to see my brother again, I had to tell the truth, and she promised me that if I told the truth, he would be able to come home, so I did. I explained the situation, did the whole marking the paper where he touched me, and they said I was very brave and I left. Extra context, my mother at the time was extremely addicted to meth, and my father had recently won full legal custody of us due to her addiction and abusive tendencies. I actually testified against her in 2 cases involving serious DV. One that split my father's head open with an ashtray, and another where she stabbed him with car keys between her knuckles in full view of me. which is why my father would not allow me to testify because of the trauma of family and DV court. The prosecutor, after discovery, which was essentially just my CPS video interview as there was absolutely no evidence an SA had occurred outside of his inappropriate contact with me, told my brother after 3 months of being held in jail, by this time he was of sound mind, that if he didn't sign a plea deal pleading no contest to the alleged assault of the babysitter and guilty to the charges relating to me, he presented an order for emergency removal as my dad refused to allow me to testify in court against him. He told him that this removal order specifically would allow my mother to take custody of all 3 of us, subjecting us to extreme situations and DV, and that if he didn't sign a deal in a week's time, he would file it immediately in family court as he was set to be bailed out within that week, giving him grounds to remove us from the home as he would be returning to our apartment. So he signed it, obviously losing any right to appeal, and even though he had absolutely no memory of the entire time he was under psychosis. Well, recently, after he was released on parole, he decided to go on the run because, well, he's kinda dumb. And during this, he's been saving money to file a writ of habeas corpus and turn himself in when he has obtained a lawyer. I wrote an entire letter explaining this whole situation in detail, how his diagnosis was confirmed during his confinement and prior by 3 different doctors, and in all honesty a scathing critique of the trauma a prosecutor was willing to put 3 children through by allowing our mother to take custody when we had just gotten some stability and comfort, knowing we wouldn't be subjected to being around hard drugs and extreme violence and neglect, all to get a conviction for a crime. Obviously no one here is a lawyer, but I just need some advice. He told me there's a possibility of me having to do phone court, and due to other SA, I'm very scared of that. In your words, would you say that this is worth me doing and helping with? Obviously I love my brother. I know what he did would be wrong under any circumstances, but I forgave him as I know that he truly had no idea what age I was, that I was his sister, or had any grasp of the consequences of inappropriate contact. I am not his victim. I'll read OP's most recent post before commenting on the story in general, but regarding her brother, it sounds like she's convinced herself he isn't guilty because he's one of the only family members she has. I can't even work out if she thinks he did assault the babysitter or not. She says she believed her, but then that there was no way that it could have happened. She's also pretty much given him a pass for being inappropriate with her too, and it's certainly not unheard of for victims of SA to sympathise with or feel bad for the person who did that to them under certain circumstances, particularly when that person is a family member or a romantic partner. Yesterday, at the time of writing this script, OP posted another update titled, "Feelings of anger and confliction." Quote, I guess this is a little bit of a rant. If anyone is unfamiliar with my story, it's in my comment history. To sum it up, I'm a victim of childhood SA online and 2 SAs in my adolescence, one involving an ex, and I'm a part of the minority of victims who were assaulted by a stranger as well. I've never had a healthy relationship with anyone, family, friends, or romantic, until I met my partner who committed his crime at 18 and convicted while we were dating at age 20. Through him, I've gained lots of healing and have actually been able to speak out and participate more fully in my recovery, as well as support him through therapy and while he makes the appropriate reparations to society and the victim. He's come such a long way, and I'm proud of the man he is, and I've also found solace in this community as well. I've always been a proponent that healing is possible for both offenders and victims. Usually offenders are also victims of abuse in some way as well. I hate the idea that victims are always in some way tainted, dirty, or ruined forever. I do honestly believe that progress can be made. That being said, lately I feel like maybe healing isn't something I myself am capable of. I find myself some days just feeling absolutely disgusting. I feel disgusted knowing what was done to me, and I feel disgusted knowing that people like that exist. And I find myself feeling like a hypocrite because I am dating and active in a community that offenders frequent. It's almost as if I want to fall into that line of thinking that every person that has done this is overall a terrible person, but obviously know that is not true. I've always been able to counter these thoughts with logic and rationale. The one person may be a bad person, but their SO status may have nothing to do with it, and there are a ton of legitimately evil people that will never be on the registry, and there are also good people that committed a crime and repaid their debt to society, and that era in their life is over. Still, I can't help but feel angry, unprotected, and overall just besides myself at times that the healthiest relationships I've had are with RSOs. I feel that I carry a scarlet letter in two ways. That I was abused and I have to carry that fact with me forever, and now I carry the secrets and burden the crime of a good man who made a terrible choice and affected someone's life. This is not to say I'm not happy with my partner. He's wonderful, in every way, and I don't believe a crime he committed at 18 should reflect who he is forever. I'm interested in hearing how some of you navigate feelings of non-healing and how you counter these negative emotions to turn it into positive ones. I'll preface this by saying I'm absolutely not condoning OP minimising the crimes of her boyfriend, I'm just trying to understand it all from her point of view. It's clear she had a really traumatic childhood. Her mum was a drug addict, she was a victim of SA herself more than once, even her brother acted inappropriately towards her. As she said, she's never had a healthy relationship with anyone, and it seems like the first person who seemed like they might treat her right unfortunately also happened to be an SO. If, as she implies, her boyfriend shows remorse for his actions and she feels like he has turned his life around, I wouldn't be surprised if it gives her some level of comfort being a survivor herself. If she sees the perpetrator of a crime similar to what she experienced take accountability and rehabilitate, maybe she can imagine that the people who did that to her feel remorse for their actions too. At the same time, even though she absolutely shouldn't, perhaps she feels partly responsible for her brother being convicted and feels compelled to save her boyfriend because she couldn't save her brother. Overall, it's just a really sad situation. I really feel for OP after everything she's been through, and it seems that her willingness to look past her boyfriend's crimes can be explained by naivete. I just really hope he genuinely has been rehabilitated and never tries to harm her. This entire subreddit is a rabbit hole of insanity, and there are so many other posts and topics I could cover, but this video is getting kinda long, so I'll make this the last. It is quite possibly the most ridiculous and offensive post on there. It was from a couple of weeks ago and was a pasted article from 10 years ago titled, "Why Queers Should Care About SOs." And yes, it's exactly as bad as it sounds. It's a long article, so I've picked out a few excerpts to give you the gist of it. I was surprised to hear some of my most educated liberal friends ask questions that were, to me, biased and misinformed. I had assumed that, as queers and allies, my friends would have greater sensitivity to the persecution SOs face in American society. I've since come to realise that queer folk are not more prone to find empathy for this population. All queer people are invested in the plight of SOs, whether they like it or not. Although I studied many subjects in college, my interest is specially aligned with the radical thinking of my queer theories coursework. Queer theory obliterates the idea of good and bad sex, and what should and should not be deemed deviant. But there was a strange silence in these class discussions as well. As my education continued, I began thinking about other people who transgressed cultural norms of sexuality and other people whose sexual desires had been labelled deviant. People who even queer theory courses weren't talking about. There might be no group more maligned, marginalised and disconcerting as modern-day America's SOs. Sociologist Joel Best describes the problematic nature of how the term deviance is used in our culture. In his book Deviance, he emphasises that a deviant label was simply a sign that some groups with power had singled out some acts or conditions for disapproval. The term means that, according to the rules of a powerful few, something is inherently wrong with you if you are not like everyone else. In other words, deviance becomes a viral social construct that serves as a moral imperative to dictate and intimidate people into behaving. Queer theory has well documented how those in power have employed the terminology of deviance to oppress queers. In recent history, society has labelled gays, lesbians, and transgender folk as abnormal, problematic, and threatening. There's no use mincing words here. The same methods historically used by the government to imprison and pathologise homosexuality and gender variation are being used today to justify the extreme marginalisation, lifetime institutionalisation, and oppression of people who have violated sex laws. SOs are the new queers. Let me be clear, I'm not advocating for the legitimisation of these acts as appropriate. A forceful, coercive, violent SA is not to be tolerated, but I am saying that the public perception of the SO and of the laws violated to become an SO is inaccurate. The SO treatment models currently in use are mostly based in cognitive behavioural therapy, helping offenders re-evaluate their thoughts and beliefs and make healthier decisions to reduce risk of re-offence. Despite this good-natured approach, these treatment models still speak of sexual deviance. One manual recommends ammonia aversion therapy, in which the offender repeatedly inhales ammonia while reciting his most deviant fantasies. The intended goal, to rid the offender of whatever desire is deemed unhealthy or deviant by the treatment provider, echoes gay conversion therapy methods. If queer theory allows for one's right to a diversity of desire, shouldn't we question the reprogramming of an offender's sexual feelings? Any queer person should feel a pang of familiarity reading about the vilification of people based on sexual desire. If queerness is teetering on the edge of what culture says is deviant, othered, or wrong, an alliance across marginalised communities is vital for acquisition and maintenance of civil liberties for all. This isn't the first time I've heard the comparison between SOs and the LGBT community, particularly pedophiles or MAPs as they seem to call themselves these days, and honestly it's one of the most ridiculous things I've ever heard. The persecution of LGBT people in the past, and even today, is not because harm or suffering is caused by these individuals simply existing and being in consenting relationships with other adults. There is absolutely nothing morally wrong with being LGBT. There is nothing inherently harmful arising from contact between consenting adults, regardless of gender or orientation. How on earth you can compare that to an SO who has literally assaulted someone, or a pedophile who watches CP and creates a demand for the abuse of children is literally beyond me. Being gay is not a choice, SAing someone is. I guess you could argue that being a non-offending pedophile isn't a choice, considering research has shown differences in the brains of pedophiles, but that doesn't mean it should be normalised or seen as a sexuality like being gay is. Regardless, SAing a child or watching CP is absolutely a choice. A choice that causes harm and suffering to children and therefore is morally wrong. It's not even remotely comparable to two gay, consenting adult men having contact with each other. We should not feel sorry for people who have committed violent crimes towards others. We shouldn't be fighting for the rights of those whose actions intentionally violated the rights of others. SOs are not oppressed or marginalised simply because they happen to not fit the heteronormative standard that society has held for a long time. They're viewed differently because they make a conscious choice to actively harm other people. The author of the article does clarify that he thinks forceful, coercive, or violent SA is not to be tolerated, but I don't understand how he can't see the problem with comparing SOs to the LGBT community. All that's going to do is increase stigma of LGBT people and reverse the acceptance and rights they historically fought so hard to get and are still fighting for today. If you don't want to be oppressed or marginalised, as the author says, for being an SO, don't SA someone. It's that simple. And I really don't know what else I can say on the matter. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts in the comments, plus any suggestions you might have for a future episode of disturbing and controversial subreddits. If you enjoyed the video, please consider liking and subscribing. Huge thank you to my Ko-fi members and channel members whose names are on screen now. I really appreciate your support. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next week in a new video.